Hello sociologists, it's me again. I've raised my camera so I'm now in full view of the screen, which is lovely. We're going to look at one more sociologist study for today, looking at Halsey, Heath and Ridge, and their look at middle class children and how they stay in school or education for longer. So, Halsey, Heath and Ridge are our sociologists. Their kind of summary is that middle class kids stay in education longer, and that's compared to working class kids. Okay, so their study was done in 1980. It is called Origins and Destinations. Again, we are going to talk about the research itself in terms of what they did, what their methods were, and then their findings. Okay, so to start with, they took a sample of 8,000 males born between the dates of 1913 and 1952. And they then separated these males, and it's really important they just looked at men. Okay, so a feminist could criticise this, we'll talk about that later, but they just looked at men. And they took these males and they separated them into 3 different classes. Now, if you can't see this on the screen, I'm going to try and focus it a little bit more on the screen itself. And if not, I'm going to send this out on YouTube as well. The first class they called the service class. Okay, now it's a bit of a confusing term because we often refer to the sort of lower classes as service class, but this is the kind of middle class. So it's managers, it's professionals, it's people who wear suits to work, basically. The second group of second category where they sort of positioned the school children into was lower middle class, okay, and then this was people who worked in sales or kind of low grade technician jobs, people who worked in things like retail, for example, that kind of stuff. And the final one they looked at was the working class. This was your factory workers or your agriculture workers or your manual kind of labourers, okay? And what they did is they took this sample of 8,000 men born between these certain dates, and they studied how long they stayed in education for. And the very, very, very simple discovery was that the children from the middle class stayed in the education system for longer than the children from the working class. And in fact, the facts that they found were this. Aha, there we go. Children from the middle class compared to the working class were 4 times more likely to still be at school, aged 16, were 8 times more likely, so a child from the middle class was 8 times more likely to still be at school compared to a child from the working class, aged 17. A child from the middle class was 10 times more likely to still be at school than a child from the working class. And the big one that I really want to take away is a child from the middle class was 11 times more likely to go to university than a child from the working class. 11 times. So you are 11 times more likely to go to university, these guys found, if you come from a middle class family than a working class family. And think about it, people. What is the thing that we define class by? You've got your job and your education. So what Halsey, Heath and Ridge found was that the middle classes were more likely to reproduce their own class, i.e. sending a child to university to get a degree to be part of the middle class, than a working class parent who was more likely to reproduce their class of not sending children to university. Now, they found a number of reasons why, okay, but we're going to talk about 2 of them, and they're really, really simple. One of them links to our work on Ball, Bow and Go. It's about school location and school choice, okay? They did find these guys did find that factors like material deprivation, socialisation, etc., they were all factors, but the two most important factors they found for why middle-class children stayed in education longer than working-class children was these. Number one, parental attitude. They found that middle-class parents were more likely to have an attitude which was supportive of education and staying in education, going to college, going to university than working class parents, and they found the flip side, that working class parents had much more of an attitude of children getting a qualification and then going to work straight away, rather than going on to university, rather than going on to higher further education and becoming masters and doctors and things. They didn't really prioritise that. Their attitude and their priorities was about getting them into work to start earning money. Okay, so children from the working classes, the attitude of their parents was to more likely pull them out of school age 16 or age 18 rather than go to university and getting them into employment. Whereas the middle class parents valued education more and were more likely to push their children further and deeper into the education system. That was one thing, parental attitudes. The second was this, what they called the distribution of grammar schools. Okay? The distribution of grammar schools. Think about that for a second. Grammar schools. Grammar schools, we know from our previous studies, grammar schools are ones where children take an entrance exam to get into, and grammar schools are ones where there is a higher than average rate of children going from grammar school onto university. Most children who go to grammar school end up going on to university. Okay, Theresa May, previous Prime Minister, went to a grammar school. Okay, most of our Prime Ministers, if they didn't go to a private school, went to a grammar school. They're very, very high-performing schools who churn out very high-performing students who go to university and often go into the top jobs in society. Okay, grammar schools are high-performing schools. Now, what these guys found was that grammar schools were more likely to exist in middle-class areas. And remember, the entrance exam means that only the brightest and the best can get in. So because they only existed, or largely existed, in middle class areas, the brightest and the best working class children might not have been able to get into a grammar school. So they might have been as intelligent as a child from the middle class, but because they didn't have a grammar school in their area, and linking to Bow, and Gurwitz, they might not have the finances or the time to commute to a grammar school. The working class children, despite their intellect, might still find themselves going to a school which performs less well than the grammar school. So the middle class children get to go to the better schools because they were distributed, they were positioned unfairly in favour of the middle class children. There were more grammar schools in middle class areas. So, in summary, Halsey, Heath and Ridge. Middle class children stay in education longer. How do we know? They are 11 times more likely to go to university. Why is this? Because parental attitude is different between middle class and working class, and even if there is no difference in attitude of parents or intellect of child, there is an unfair, weighted in favour of the middle class, unfair distribution of grammar schools where there are more grammar schools in middle class areas. And thus endeth the lesson.